Good morning, patriots and freedom fighters. I appreciate you being here. Conservative Tact. It's the show that speaks truth to power with the Bible in one hand and the Constitution in the other. I'm your host, Kat Barker, and I'm bringing you yet another unapologetic dose of Liberty First commentary. And today's episode, buckle up, because Mark Avalar, he is a 60-year-old independent contractor. I am also an independent contractor. I don't know.
Right.
Mark. So I am very interested in what you have to say because it could mean something for my life, like very personal to me. So Illinois, of course, is leading the charge, not for freedom, but for bigger government and union control over your right to work. This week, the city council, they dropped a legislative bombshell, or rather punted it to Springfield rather than Chicago. So I wanted to ask you about that because I'm not really too familiar with what was going on with Uber and Lyft drivers. And they were wanting to unionize?
Yeah, what it is that, and it was the Chicago City Council, the largest in the state, they punted this because some of the aldermen did not want to have to take a controversial vote that would have either upset the unions or would have upset the businesses in Chicago. So there's supposed to be a city council vote this past Monday or Tuesday at the committee level on an ordinance that would set up collective bargaining for Uber and Lyft drivers. Now, that may sound plain Jane, okay, this happens all the time, but the thing is, Uber and Lyft drivers are classified as 1099 independent contractors. They're not W-2 employees. And why this is outside of the normal course of business is because according to the National Labor Relations Act, federal legislation has been around since the 30s, you have to be a W-2 employee because in the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act that revised the National Labor Relations Act, independent contractors were exclusively prohibited from being a part of unionization. So now what's happening now is the city council, because they didn't want to take a controversial vote for the city of Chicago Lyft drivers, they decided to punt this, as you said, to Springfield and allow state legislation, which will it affect independent contractors statewide who happen to be app-based drivers. That's how this industry is usually referred to, whether it's Uber, Lyft, Instacart, DoorDash. Think of all the app-based businesses that take place, and this could impact Illinoisans across the state, depending on the legislation. We haven't seen a bill yet. I'm anxiously waiting to see that bill and share it with my own local legislator, who's also a former 1099 independent contractor, and we're going to make sure we do this right, not rushed.
Right, exactly. And for those of you outside Illinois, whenever Chicago doesn't really want to deal with their own mess, they dump it on the rest of the state. It seems kind of like a trope, something that they do all the time. So, according to Capitol Facts, this just a bill, right? This could be a bill. It hasn't been assigned a bill number yet, but this could set the stage really for some sort of like unionization, but it's a problem because doesn't it run afoul if you're an independent contractor? And like you were talking about, that this is not traditionally how unionization works. Is this something running afoul of like federal labor law? Say it winds up getting a bill number and winds up being state. It's no longer a Chicago thing. It's a state thing. So Springfield assigns it a number. It's state legislation. Is there any kind of federal law a labor law do you know of that this kind of is blurry with?
Well, the big one is the National Labor Relations Act, because what the Capitol Facts, they had a collection of stories from other news sources, and what they will say is that, well, they're looking at what they did in Massachusetts. So let me explain Massachusetts. They had a ballot question last fall, and they had an issue where Uber and Lyft drivers wanted to be unionized, and the voters approved this ballot question at the ballot box. It's great it was an initiative. It was approved. That's democracy. Problem was there's no legislation written to support this yet. So Massachusetts is trying to frame legislation that would not be bound by the National Labor Relations Act. So what that will mean is that relations between the unionization of Uber and Lyft and other app-based drivers will not be regulated through the National Labor Relations Act. That means there's no oversight by the National Labor Relations Board, which is part of the National Labor Relations Act. So basically, these are the states, and granted, states are often the laboratory for democracy, but within reason, states would operate outside of the normal channels of regulating unions. And this brings up something that has not been talked about, but is definitely leading to. That's something called sectoral bargaining. This is different than your standard one work site, one union local negotiation for the workers at a work site. This is looking at doing this industry-wide. That's what Massachusetts is trying to set up with the approval of the ballot question, but they haven't implemented anything yet because it's still too new. We're barely over 6 months after the November election. And from my knowledge, and there are definitely subject matter experts who are closer to Massachusetts, how are they going to do this? Is it going to be legal? Will it have court challenges? It could be all the above. And that's where it's coming from.
And, well, Mark, maybe I should ask you first. Why do you care so much? Obviously, you're an independent contractor. Mark Evelar, we're talking with him. I said your name correctly, right? Avelar?
That is correct. And by the way, there is an Avelar in the Illinois House of Representatives. We're not related. Just to make sure, because it's a very uncommon name, and so just to make sure, no, we're not related.
So why care? I am an independent contractor, but what does this mean for independent contractors? I do freelance writing, like yourself. I think you're a freelance writer as well.
Correct.
I do freelance writing, and how will this affect your, everyday independent contractor?
Well, how it affects this is because over the past 8 years, there has been a real effort to try to eliminate 1099 independent contracting as a way to provide for yourself and your family. This has been going on. It started in big time in California in 2018 with the approval of a bill known as Assembly Bill 5 or AB 5, and it implements what is known as a strict ABC test. So what does that mean? It's supposed to be simple. It just says the worker is free from control and direction of hiring entity. The worker performs work that is outside the usual course of business. The worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade occupation. Well, the second prong, the B prong, is where workers run into problems. Because let's just say you're an independent writer, you're augmenting staff for a local publication. Well, under California's AB 5, that publication would have to bring you on as a W-2 employee. You don't have the option to stay as a 1099, and California enforces that law so stringently that they threaten the businesses, and businesses don't want to hire 1099s, whether it's an independent writer, a musician, a truck driver. This is not just Uber and Lyft, and this is what went wrong with California. It's well-intentioned. People thought, okay, maybe Uber and Lyft, they need to have some controls, but they tried to control everything. And by they, I mean the far left. I mean the left, the extreme left position has been, we want to unionize everybody. And it's turned into a nasty case of freelance busting. Well, California passed this. Governor Gavin Newsom signed it in 2019. It was implemented in 2020. And now there is no doubt we have empirical evidence that there are fewer job opportunities, not just for 1099s, but for W-2s as a result of the AB 5 law. And if this spreads nationwide, and there's been efforts to push this nationwide, all independent workers, that's an estimated 72 to 75 million 1099 independent contractors, whether it's just supplemental income or full-timers, they are at risk from being able to provide for themselves and their families the way they want to, and most importantly, to be your own boss. That's real freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the sectoral bargaining that you've been talking about, and I want to just zero in on this for our listeners and viewers. They're not just talking about factories or shops, and what they're trying to do is unionize entire sectors of the economy through state law. And state after state is doing this. This isn't just Illinois, and it's starting to get kind of deja vu, right?
Hmm.
Where these unions are trying to expand power through this tactic that you coined as sectoral bargaining,
Hmm.
and nobody wants to talk about this. I think I don't know why the mainstream media has not. I haven't heard about a lick of this, and I'm glad that I got your email because this directly affects me. You know?
Yes, it affects, as I said, depending on whose numbers you use, it's tens of millions of workers. And we had the election last fall. The working class clearly is going towards Republicans and President Trump, but this crosses party lines. I mean, some of the professional associates I've become working with on this issue from all across the country. I mean, as a friend of mine would say, these are people who voted for anybody from Bernie Sanders to Donald Trump. That's a very true, because everybody has. I mean, there are a couple of wealthy college graduates I've worked with to stop this type of legislation from taking hold across the country. Because in Congress, this was tried as recent, I mean, as far back as 2020. They tried to put this ABC test into federal law at the National Labor Relations Act in order to set up unionization across the country under the NLRA for independent contractors. Right now, it's prohibited by federal law. And even when the Democrats controlled the White House, the Senate, and the House in the 117th Congress, fortunately, you had three centrist Democrats stop this in the Senate. Schumer, then Majority Leader Schumer, would not bring this for a floor vote because it went too off the deep end.
Yeah, well, it's like forced unionization, and that's not liberty. Okay, you can't force people to join a group. Okay, we have the
Right.
right to assemble, but we also have the right not to assemble. It almost
Correct.
is reminiscent, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole, but there's push now at the state house um, to try to do like compulsory voting. And this is done in Australia. I know I've
Mhm.
done shows on this before, but people have said, hey, right now, if you're living in the state of Illinois, you go to the DMV, you're automatically registered to vote if you renew your driver's license. So you're like automatically registered to vote. And Senator John Curran of the Senate, he's the Republican minority leader. I will never forget this. He said, people have the right to vote, but they also have the right not to vote. We
Mhm.
can't compel our citizenry to unionize if they don't want to unionize. So this is where the state begins to dictate how, when, and for whom you can labor. And they do it under this guise of, oh, it's your right, unionization, stick it to the man. But like at the same time, you're like forcing me into this group, and like if you're an independent contractor, you're going to be forced into a group, and quite literally, that's the antithesis of why people do what they do.
It's biblically based liberty of conscience. We have the liberty to apply our conscience, whether it's how to work or how to worship. I mean, this comes straight from Scripture. I mean, goes back to the First Amendment. How did we get there with freedom of religion? Well, it went back to Roger Williams and 1644 when he coined that phrase, liberty of conscience, and he took it straight from the book of John, chapter 18, verse 36. My kingdom is not of this world. We apply it, and the Scripture is the best source for how we are meant to live. This is the way God means for us to live.
Well, and I have scripture pulled for this show. So let me get to Proverbs 14:23. It says,
Amen.
all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. We need a system that rewards initiative, not one that crushes it under layers of bureaucracy and collective bargaining contracts. If you don't want to do that, I mean, there's so many opportunities to unionize, but if you want to be an independent contractor, and there's just industries that by design sectors of the economy where this has traditionally worked. So independent contractors, I really like it because I can write, as an independent journalist and then give it to multiple publications, so you can stay independent and not be beholden to said publications, advertisers, but they'll pick up your story and you can sell them your story and they'll pay you for your work. It's like this independence that, it's initiative, and they're trying to crush any kind of individuality, I think.
It is, and it's something to point out though. Up until this came up with this Chicago punting, and you never know, they could write the legislation that only applies to Cook County. Whether they'll do that and whether they'll stand up in a court, that's another matter.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at other states like California and the AB5 law. Back in late 2019, there was some talk, but that's all it was talk about going that same direction. But Illinois didn't go that direction. I mean, we usually follow California's bad examples. This is one case that we didn't, and there's a reason for this. I think I mentioned to you, I testified in Springfield at the end of April to discuss this issue, not the sectoral bargaining. I didn't touch this, but to look at legislation I've been working on with State Representative Suzanne Ness. She's my representative here in the 66th District. And because she's a former 1099 independent contractor herself. And she explained that before the House Labor and Commerce Committee, where we were testifying side by side. But talk about the Lord's provisions. I also had as Zoom witnesses, New Jersey-based national subject matter expert. Her name is Kim Cavan. And I also had senior economic fellow, Dr. Leah Palagashvili out of Mercatus Center of George Mason University, who's done the most empirical-based research on this topic. She's definitely well known. She's testified for Congress numerous times. And when one of the state reps, State Representative Benson, he's out of Plainfield in Will County, he asked about, well, how far does this go? I said, well, look, I'll leave the metrics to Dr. Palagashvili, but over 600 professionals were negatively impacted. This is not fantasy. This is fact. This happened in California when AB 5 was implemented. Other states have tried to do the strict ABC test. Now, the context is tax status. That is how you are classified to be a W-2 or a 1099. You have a client that's going to submit a 1099, so the government will collect its taxes from you. But in California, the employers have been scared from hiring 1099s, even just to augment staff. Think about independent truckers. Remember the supply chain issues we had back in 21 on the West Coast? Mm-hmm. Well, you had a problem because California-based independent truckers could not work at the ports in order to ship the goods out of the ports, out of the canisters that came from overseas, and you had a supply chain glitch. They were desperately trying to give an exemption to truckers, but that didn't go through in Sacramento. They finally, over time, the issue was resolved, but there was a time in there where the California Truckers Association were trying to get legal relief. The Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case, the United States Supreme Court. So in mid-July of 2022, the independent truckers shut down the ports over AB 5. And the beautiful part, and this is the labor movement in its purest form, the longshore and warehouse workers locals were also protesting the Pacific Maritime Association. They had their own labor strife. The unionists honored the independent truckers, and they stood side by side with their respective grievances. And that is what the labor movement's really about. That's working people working together, men and women who want to earn an honest day's living. And that's why I've become so passionate about this, because I saw what was going on in California with AB 5. I read some of the testimonies that came from people like theater. I mean, this about killed small independent theaters in California where people could do the arts. They had an arts business, or someone who had a yoga class they were doing as independent contractors. One of the latest is nail stylists. They would rent space at various salons, including the big ones. They built their clientele, and of course the salon owner wants them there because they might want to get their hair done too. That's how business is meant to work. Someone has a product They sell it their way, and then the salon benefits from that. But now AB 5 regulators are trying to stop that. The Civil Rights Commission has gotten involved because it seems to be targeting minority 1099s. This is a very complex issue, which fortunately Illinois has been shielded. But if this sectoral bargaining goes through, that's changing from a standpoint of unionization outside of the scope, let alone control, of the National Labor Relations Act and the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board.
Yeah. Well, and I wonder why they're doing. I remember when Kamala Harris was running, and this was, I mean, multiple reasons got me to the ballot box, but it was particularly this reason. So the Biden-Harris administration, or well, Harris, one of her platforms, one of her policies that she was going in with, she was going to regulate and make it really illegal for companies to do business with independent contractors and gig workers. And there's a part of this too where I think that I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the public sector is like pissed off at the private sector. I don't know what's going on, but the companies, I know corporations, specifically manufacturing, they'll do contract work all of the time, to save a little bit of money. Because in the law, if it's just a small like gig or a small little project that they're doing, they'll bring in maybe even engineers, they'll bring in some engineers and then they'll hire them for seasonal work on this one project. And then they were a contract worker. We're not obligated to give you benefits or anything like that. You just come in, you work on this project, and then you leave. And this kind of saves them money. So that way you don't have to hire a full-time. So I wonder if there's this aspect where, the proponents of regulating independent contractors or making it outright illegal, like this policy, which I was completely floored when I had read this when she was running. But I wonder if there's like this element where they think corporations abuse this, where they think that corporations are out there hiring a bunch of independent contractors. But honestly, I don't think any business model would work. Maybe the media industry, they do that a lot with the freelance writers and they can get away with it. But you're not going to have evil corporations just hiring independent, because it does get expensive if you do it long term. Mm-hmm. And I don't know. I don't know what their reasoning would be behind all of this.
It's what I've seen and in my work in this area, because I've been working this directly now for the past over 5 years now, because it's all started in California. We started seeing some congressional seats and some state legislative seats be flipped from blue to red because back out there they'd gone too far with AB 5. I mean, everybody knew somebody who was impacted negatively by AB 5, whether it's an independent truck driver or an independent writer, an independent photographer, a language translator. I mean, these were people who were living out their dreams, being their own boss, being able to work from home, no commute, less stress than having to go into the office and deal with corporate politics. And you started seeing people reacting at the ballot box. There was a prop, it's called Prop 22 during the 2020 election, which basically took the AB 5, made an initiative to classify independent Uber and Lyft drivers, app-based drivers, as independent contractors. So now California is also one of these states that are trying to do the sectoral bargaining where, okay, we're going to let you keep your independent contracting tax status. So you can still stay an independent contractor, but you have to be unionized now. So now they're taking it's a different tact, but it's a challenge to our freedom.
Yeah.
And that is where it comes down to our God-given rights to pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the provisions of God, the gifts that he gave us, the resources that he gave in order to earn a living to yourself and your family, give back to the community. And there are many 1099s that do this full time. I think you're one of them, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Oh yeah.
Exactly.
I'm just 1099. I write for publications, and that's what I do full time. So.
Exactly, and then I do a lot of things. I do some business consulting as well as I do writing, and I do even help candidates with their policy issues. I'm more of a policy consultant than I am a campaign consultant. And that's what I like. At this stage of life, I've seen a lot of issues. Some big ones are playing out. This one is one of them. Mental health is another passion area of mine. So I get to be my own boss and do what I want to do, not what somebody tells me I have to do.
Yeah, well, and what God wants you to do for out His purposes. So, Galatians 5:1. I've got to throw scripture in there. That's just the way the show works.
That's great. That's terrific.
It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. It applies to spiritual freedom, absolutely, but it also speaks to our responsibility to guard against any form of tyranny, including economic control. And I think that this is just a form of economic control. And I don't know, they're going to do this guise of like, oh, these evil corporations, they're going to try to, contract you, and they're not going to want to give you bennies, or they don't want to make you employee. I don't know what the hell it is. Really, it's interesting because there's more and more dissent, like the rise of homeschooling. There's a rise in homeschooling. There's a rise in independent contract work, and especially after COVID-19, I think people are starting to realize, like, hey, I've got this treasure and this talent that God wants me to use for this purpose. And I think that, in a time of despair, right, COVID 2020, people are like, man, I figured out what I really want to do with my life, and I figured out what God wants me to do with my life. Amen. And people are going and they're leaving the public education system, which I think was created in order to be a good corporate cog. Somebody who goes and works for a corporation. And look, not against corporations or big businesses at all. If that's what you want to do, that's what you want to do. You want to unionize? Go unionize. You want to go work for a corporation, do it. But you can't force people to do that.
Exactly. And certainly but what came up in my testimony, I shared something that happened back in 2023 when I was working, and my friend from New Jersey, Miss Cavan, participated through Zoom, and her and Chairman, he was in person at this roundtable for independent workers in Carpentersville, and he explained his business. He's a 1099. He made it very clear. I'm a contractor. I need the flexibility. I'm a real estate appraiser. I work primarily for two clients, and she had to chime in saying, you would not be able to do this if a California AB5 law was in Illinois. Mm-hmm. And you could hear a pin drop when the chairman of the House Labor and Commerce Committee got that news. You could hear a pin drop in that room. Mm-hmm. But that's what's taking place. Freelance busting, and that's the term my friend Kim Cavan did give, and that's the name of her her Substack. She really nailed it on the head. I mean, people may not know they're going to be vulnerable, or if they think they're okay. Yeah, people, and I'm not an enemy of unions. I think unions should be strong. I think all workers should be strong, whether you're in a union or not. Mm-hmm. And now, President Trump's second administration, we all thought he was going to be, these type of regulations weren't going to come up, but then he chose Lori Chavez DeRemer to be his labor secretary. Her record in her one term in Congress, she was out of Oregon, she actually co-sponsored legislation that applied the ABC test. It's known as the Protecting the Right to Organize, or the PRO Act. This has been big labor's number one policy and priority for the past 8 years, because it would repeal right to work laws. It would reclassify 1099s to W-2 for the sake of union organizing. But now that path has failed, you see some in the far left trying to bring sectoral bargaining, work around federal law. And now you got these states right now: California, Illinois, Minnesota, and the one that started it all was Massachusetts.
Okay.
And it's unknown. This is experimental. I mean, it's like an experimental vaccine. Where are the safety trials? Where are all the precautions to ensure this is the right thing to do? And it's something I'll be discussing with my local state rep, and I've already testified before Labor and Commerce earlier this year. Well, you have some other options to do here too. If you're going to make this for these Chicago-based Uber Lyft drivers, if that can something you can legally do, then don't give us the entire state.
Yeah,
You don't
maybe
need to
just
do
do
this.
a carve out. But if they do that, I'd be worried about the precedent that it sets. And okay, they do it this legislative session for just Chicago, these Uber and Lyft drivers, and they do a carve out bill, which they do all of the time. I don't understand how that's even legal. Okay, but say they do a carve out bill and they just do Chicago, next legislative session, it's going to give them more gas, more gas in the tank to go after the entire state. So you testified before the state in the state house before the
Yes.
Senate or House or
The
both.
House Labor and Commerce Committee,
Okay,
the
so
Illinois House.
was it due to a bill?
Yes. House Bill 1311 is a very simple bill because what it specifies, because right now Illinois set up the construction industry under the Employee Classification Act back in 2007. That is the one area where that is the one place where we have a classification test, and it's not the strict ABC test. It's more of an ABCD test. It's not strict, but as the statute defines construction industry, those workers have to be classified as W-2s. That's the only industry in this state that has that kind of worker classification under the statutes right now. Everyone else uses what's known as the common law test, which is sometimes known as the IRS test, because as you know, as a 1099, the IRS has about a 20-prong test of confirming that you are a 1099. And it's basically in the contractor's favor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's known as the common law or IRS test. What the bill that I was working with Suzanne Ness to do was to codify the common law test under statutory law, because legislation like the Federal Protecting the Right to Organize or PRO Act, that law, that there's an amendment in there that strictly says this federal legislation will not supersede any statutory classification law by the states. And I'm trying to protect it from the states.
Yeah.
So as Illinois being a state, if we had this under statutory law, that's better. Common law is good, statutory is better.
Yeah. It's like it serves as a protection if the federal government were to pass something like that, what they had before, but it didn't go anywhere. Then it would protect us. House Bill 1311.
Correct. House Bill 1311, because right now the PRO Act is back. The Democrats reintroduced it in this session of Congress. It's under HR 20 in the House, and it's under Senate. It's under, I believe it's number 5. I want to say 567. I may not have that number right. Or 852. I think it's 852.
PRO Act.
The PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. Now, here's something though that is intriguing since the Trump administration took office. You know, Sean O'Brien, he's the president of the International Teamsters. He stayed out. He stayed neutral in the presidential race last year. He spoke at the Republican National Convention. That's the one speech that I was in Milwaukee I recorded end to end on my phone, because he did not touch the PRO Act. And I'm sure the Trump campaign would not let him touch the PRO Act if he wanted to. He did a little dog whistling. It was a good speech. It wasn't a great speech. It wasn't a bad speech. It was a good speech. But all working people, and that's where I pointed out in one of my articles, is that the working class includes 1099s. It's not just W-2 union card holders. It's all workers. And we need the administration, and they didn't do this until day 102, where they said they would reverse, they're looking to reverse the Biden administration's independent contractor rule that went into effect in March of 2024. And it's like a 7-prong test that you really don't know how you're going to be classified. Depends on who's doing the enforcing. I called it the Labor Lawyers Recovery Act of 2024 because you need a lawyer to figure this out, which you shouldn't have to do as a small business person.
Yeah.
I mean, you need legal help. You should have legal help, but there's times where you shouldn't have to have legal help, and this is one of them. And so that rule has been basically suspended. The Trump administration is not going to pursue, but we didn't know that till May the 1st of this year.
Oh.
Over 100 days. So in my testimony, you might have seen for the first 100 days, the Trump administration did not come to the aid of independent contractors. And seeing Lori Chavez de Reamer and her freelance busting record from Congress was a real concern. I know I was on other podcasts where I said, this is why I'm concerned about Lori Chavez de Reamer. She was one of 3 Republicans in the last Congress to co-sponsor the PRO Act in the House. She actually did, and here's the funny part. She did it on the first day of the convention last July. And I'm giving members of Congress, a couple of them I had seen on TV, I met them. I had to give them the bad news. They didn't know about this.
Yeah.
A defection like that. And the way that law is written, I mean, I published an article last fall. There are 10 ways you can amend the PRO Act. So I would say, if I were running for Congress, I would say I would be in favor of an amended PRO Act. We in Illinois went with the Workers' Rights Amendment. I was against it, but the voters spoke. You grandfather current right to work states the way they are. Taft-Hartley's been around for over 75 years. If a state hasn't gone to right to work, they're not going to after that long period. So you grandfather those who did, and if they turn back, look, Michigan just did this in the past couple of years because the Democrats won the trifecta, so they repealed their right to work. See, that's democracy. Even if I don't agree with it, it's still the way it was done at the ballot box.
Yeah, well, and if you don't like it, move to a right to work state.
That too. Well, look at what several businesses are doing right now. They're moving to Indiana, Iowa, and Wisconsin. It wasn't Johnsonville doing something like that? They closed a downstate plant, or in the process of closing. So yeah, they're moving to the right to work states, and that's got to be a reason for it.
Yeah. But you're right. The democratic process, Amendment 1, this was mainly public sector unions, which is why it was just such a nightmare, because it gives public sector unions pretty much unlimited power, where they can go and I'm a firefighter, which I'm not disparaging firefighters at all, folks, but I'm a firefighter, or I'm a state trooper, and I patrol the highways, and I go up and down the highways. But I want 70 days of pet bereavement. My dog died, and I'm going to try to get the state police to give me my pet bereavement days. I mean, I know that's an extreme, but that's the way I interpreted the Amendment 1. But like you said, the voters spoke, and they voted it in, and it's enshrined in our Constitution now.
It is, and of course, as you know, with Illinois constitutional amendments, there's a direct way and there's a backdoor way. This won through the back door because it didn't reach 60% outright. So it won through the back door because 50% of the ballots cast had yes votes. And so it wasn't like the graduated income tax back in 2020 where it failed both ways. That's why I didn't, because I said it's a 2-step process in Illinois. Like in other states, like in Florida, you have to reach that 60% threshold or it doesn't pass.
Yeah.
There were some controversial amendments there. I'm sure you're familiar with Amendment 4 in Florida last fall. It didn't get to 60%. It got over a majority, but it didn't get to 60%.
So it got shut down, yeah.
So it got shot down.
So we're going to wrap it up, but I do want to ask, what can we do? I always like to let my listeners know, what can we do? So obviously, stay in touch with your congressman. Keep an eye on the PRO Act. Folks, you can type it in your search bar, look at PRO Act, go look at the bill status. Keep an eye, obviously, on what happens in the State House this fall veto session, because there could very well be a bill where it's statewide. It says, hey, 1099s, or something. It would be similar to that of what California has, right? If they were to create legislation here at a state level.
I think the one you want to look at more is Massachusetts. The AB 5 is likely not going to come up. There didn't seem to be a lot of interest in doing that. But something I learned from the subject matter hearing where I testified at is, with the Department of Labor, someone has to administer this. And reading how Massachusetts is setting up their legislation, you're creating like a panel that's going to oversee And keep in mind, this is without any kind of federal support because this is outside of the National Labor Relations Act. So the Illinois has to go it alone here. And if they try to use the Massachusetts model, that is fraught with um,
So,
discrepancies that are going to make this. I'm sure it's going to be in the courts for a few years if they go that way. But are there better options? And that's something I'll be working with State Representative Ness and hopefully with her colleagues. If you really see us having to have a need to do this, if it's going to be controlled in Chicago and Chicago only, that's probably the best solution here. And then if Chicago puts it to a referendum to the ballot next year, that's probably a step in the right direction. But the thresholds that they're setting up in Massachusetts, you have to be a large rider or a medium driver, if you will, based on volume. And how do you declare having enough for a union or to have representation? This is untried.
yeah,
It's like a vaccine that you've never had before. It's untried.
I think it's so stupid. I mean, the Uber drivers and the Lyft drivers, right? Why would you want to unionize? I just don't get it, because if you really wanted to be in a union and you wanted to be a delivery driver, that was unionized, like go, do, there's plenty of trucking companies where there's union labor, right? So I don't know why they would just get a different job. You know what I mean? Like, that's what I like. At the end of the day, I know that, you can't say that because it's not politically correct. But like, if you don't like it, then go. There's so many other delivery services that you can go to if you don't like the way Uber pays or Lyft pays. I guess that'd be like their gripe and why they'd want to unionize.
Right. And that's the worker's choice. You're leaving the worker to decide for him or herself to do what they need to do. And if they don't, obviously you have to have a product. If you're a 1099, you're offering a product that somebody sees a value that they're going to pay you for. Now it's up to you to offer the product. If you don't have it, maybe you need to look at W-2 work because it's not for everybody. I think you'll agree it's not for everybody. But if you have the skills, the gifts, or you've built up, let's just say, for instance, nannies that work outside of agencies, they've built up a clientele. They don't have to go through an agency to be placed anywhere around the country. They're their own boss. They can take care of children wherever they are. They make their own arrangements and they do quite well, but they have to put in their time. It takes them at least 10 years to build up a clientele that you can support yourself outside of having to work through an agency. But that's the American dream. That's the American success story. And something that if we all find common ground, like for instance, right now, very briefly, in Congress right now, Senator Josh Hawley, I know you've referred to him a few times, he is working with Democrats to try to pass one component for helping all unions get that first contract, because that has been a problem. Anywhere across the spectrum, you can find that there are people who don't like companies that drag their feet on doing the first contract after workers vote for representation under the NLRA, the National Labor Relations Act. So there is a bill, Senate 844, Senator Moreno and Senator Hawley, but they started out with 3 Democratic co-sponsors, and they've added at least 2 that I know of, including freshman Senator Ruben Gallego. He's not exactly a centrist, let alone a right-winger. He's a far left, but he's on board as a co-sponsor. So this is where you bring effective public policy, get over the party labels, get out of the narratives, the talking points, the platitudes, the bromance. Because say you look at our Illinois delegation, all the Democrats are co-sponsoring the PRO Act, as is HR 20. All 14 House members and both of our senators, they're back in the Senate version of Senate 852. And get out of that mindset. That's not the way God guides us. What happened to Isaiah 118? Come, let us reason together.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And, there's got to be a way to kind of meet in the middle. I don't understand the Ubers and the Lyft people, because it's just like you go in with that expectation because they should understand that they're a 1099, because it's not like a hidden thing. They'll tell you, hey, you're going to be a 1099 and you're not really an employee. You're more so somebody who gets paid but there's so many perks to that. And I don't know if they're just not educated. Then shame on Uber and Lyft. They should be educating They're 1099 employees. Hey, this is your contract. This is, I don't know if that's happening. I don't know. I've never driven for Uber. I have driven DoorDash though. That is so much fun.
So you were a dasher. Okay, that's cool.
I was a DoorDasher. It was a lot of fun. I didn't do it a lot. I was a waitress, and I did it on the side, kind of, when I had time, which is the beauty of contract work. Because if you do something full time or part time, you can kind of pick up these side jobs. But I don't know. It's just odd to me. And I think you're right. There's got to be some sort of middle where we come to an agreement. If it is just Chicago and Uber, fine. Just carve them out. And if they want to unionize specifically in that area, here's what I think the crux of the issue is, the root cause. Maybe Chicago, the population exodus that's happened over the last few years. Maybe that's affecting how much money they're getting and how much work is available. And the crime, right? We're not naive here. We know that Ubering, your prime hours would be like 11 to 2 a.m. when people are going to the bars, right? It's not safe anymore because between takeovers and the kids that are going in and looting these businesses. So, this is just, I think that there's a root cause to why these people aren't even getting the money that they had intentionally signed up for. They thought that the business was good, and then all of a sudden it's dropped off by a lot. So I don't know. But you're right. There's got to be something that we can do to protect this form of work, this form of workforce.
Well, what I do like to do in my own business is let's look for, it's that classic divergent and then converge on what is the best solution for you. And in the case of public policy, what is the best solution, especially on a board, like I'm on my local mental health board here in Northern Kane. We got to come to the best solution, and we've done that. And obviously, if it's challenged, we will defend it. But we go based on best practices. We learn lessons that others have learned, so we don't have to recreate the wheel. If our community's different, if it's similar to what another mental health board has done, by all means, let's look at their good examples and modify it to what will work for us.
Yeah.
And that's just, you can do that with public policy. Let's get away from those talking points and those bromides and all the narratives and the platitudes. Let's just get to the truth and apply the truth. And just as the scripture says, the truth will set us all free.
Yes. Oh, well, that is a great spot to end. Mark Evelar, I appreciate you coming on. Anything else you'd like to add? And how can people help in protecting the 1099 workforce?
Keep an eye on, there's a great publication. It's a Substack, freelancebusting.com. That is the name of it. It's she's my friend Kim Cavan, New Jersey based, because right now New Jersey is the latest battlefield because the outgoing Phil Murphy administration, Governor Phil Murphy, is trying to change and put an even stricter ABC test through executive fiat, not through legislation. They failed in the legislature. So Monday is a big hearing in Trenton where the independent contractors will speak out, and my friend Kim will definitely be writing up on that because she's going to be testifying. She's going to be literally in the middle of the action. And New Jersey, follow New Jersey's gubernatorial race. The Republican nominee, Jack, I know I get his name right, Ciattarelli, he has already said if New Jersey outgoing administration tries to put this rule in effect, he's going to repeal it. But you got to get him elected. And he came within 4 points of flipping that governor's seat back in 2022 and 2021. Very close. And remember, that's the same state that the Senate president lost his reelection bid to a furniture truck driver. So now, if the 1.7 million ICs can ensure that they flip that governor's mansion and stop this rule, that's going to be a proof that the working class includes the 1099 workers, and we need to bring that freedom to every state, including Illinois. And we will work with anyone, Democrat, Republican alike, but your record had better be the right record, and that means don't do something that California or Massachusetts is trying to do. Do what's best for Illinois. Apply your common sense, Midwestern values, and let's just let people work the way they want to work.
Yeah. 64 million Americans, according to 2023, sir, or they polled 64 million Americans are engaged in independent work.
Yeah, that sounds like the Upwork research, or
Yes.
maybe someone else. So
yeah, I'm at Heritage Foundation.
okay, Heritage. Upwork, I remember 64 million. MBO and associates or MBO partners generally says 72 to 75. It doesn't matter whose source; it's tens of millions. And in Illinois, that's an estimated 2.87 million here in Illinois.
Wow. Well, Mark, I appreciate you being on. We're going to have you on again soon, and hopefully your friend as well, Kim.
Yes.
Great.
Kim and another gentleman, I'll give you his information. He's in the middle of he's a Massachusetts-based attorney. He's in the middle of the Massachusetts fight, and he's the president of New Jobs America. I think you'd like to talk to him as well.
Awesome. Mark, you have a great rest of your day. And folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and like the show. Share this out with your friends. Share this out so that way people know that this is about worker empowerment. Okay, this is about making sure workers feel empowered. This is worker empowerment versus worker enslavement. So be sure to subscribe. This has been the Conservative Cat Show, where freedom isn't optional and silence is never the